In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. So last time we left off in 1 Corinthians 7 at verse 17. And in the first part of the chapter, St. Paul was speaking about his views on if someone should be married or not. And he spoke about how those people who are married in the world will have difficulty. But for those who are not able to live celibate as virgins, then it is better for them to marry than to burn with passion. And he spoke for some time about this point, about how being consecrated to service and consecrated to God is good, but if we cannot be fully consecrated and then we need to marry, it's good, but it also will be more distracting. It'll be a more distracting life to distract us away from God. Here at verse 17, he begins speaking about the idea that everybody, in whatever state that they were called into being Christian, they need to remain in that state, right? There's no reason to change it just because they have now become Christian. So he's speaking to those people who are Gentiles, those people who are not, were not originally Christian. They converted to Christianity, and here they are now thinking, okay, what is it that we should do? Like, should we leave our lives? Should we leave our jobs? Should we leave our spouses? Should we change vocations? What is it that we should do? And so here he's telling them essentially, you don't have to change anything. Continue to live your life as it is, but now as a believer. So he says, but as God has distributed to each one, as the Lord has called each one, so let him walk. And so I ordain in all the churches. Okay, so St. Paul is saying there are many different paths that we can follow as Christian, right? It's not like everybody has to become a monk, or everybody has to become a nun, or everybody has to serve in a certain service. Everybody is, called to be where they are. Why do you think that is? Why do you think St. Paul is making that point and saying, in whatever way God has called you, let him walk? Why is he saying that?
Don't be jealous of other people who may have a more fulfilling or popular way of I don't know. Like people have some people serve in Sunday school, but some people also serve by leading the church or making different services. But whatever you do best, you should do.
Okay. But in the context specifically of having become Christian, so for instance, later on he's going to speak about slaves. Okay, so and he's going to say, if you are a slave when you're called to be a Christian, you don't have to change. You can remain as you are. If you can get your freedom, that's good. But even if you can't, live faithfully as you are. Right? Why is his emphasis on stay as you are? If you are married, stay married. If you're single, you don't have to be married. You can stay as you are, right? Why is he always saying this? The idea wherever state you're in is good.
Maybe because we're called to bring glory to God's name through that state, through that position that we're holding, or through that job that we have, or service in the church, whatever it is, we're there for a reason, and we're in that path for a reason. And at the end of the day, we're there to do it faithfully, to glorify God in it.
Good. So everybody is called by God to be in a certain status, and as a believer, we can have an influence on the people that are in that status around us. Like when Christ said that we should be the salt of the earth, right? The salt of the earth permeates the world. It permeates, right, in every place. If all the Christians decided, you know what, let's all move to Romania, and Romania is going to be the Christian country, and that's the only place where Christians will be, and we all go to Romania. And for all Christians, it's great, because everybody's a Christian and everything is good, right? Okay, but now where's the salt? It's kind of like you get food and it not taste good because it's too much salt. But the rest of the food is bland, right? So the idea of Christianity was never a kind of isolation from the world, right? Christianity was always meant to be that Christians are everywhere. Christians are in the government, Christians on the private life, Christians are of every social status, rich, poor, whatever the case may be, right? So he's making that emphasis here. Was anyone called while circumcised? Let him not become uncircumcised. Was anyone called while uncircumcised? Let him not be circumcised. So, for instance, when you become a Christian, you don't have to be circumcised, right? Why was circumcision such a big deal at the time?
Because it was a Jewish tradition.
Jewish tradition? That meant what?
Right. That you were like cleansed. It was like a form of baptism.
Yeah. So in the Old Testament, it was like necessary essentially to become among the people of God, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in the New Testament, it was replaced by baptism. So, but at the time, there was all this controversy, right, from the Jews saying, the Gentiles should be circumcised whenever they convert to Christianity, right? So he is saying the circumcision is not the issue. If you are in a state of uncircumcision, you don't, after you become Christian, you don't have to become circumcised. And if you are already circumcised, there's nothing wrong with that too. Stay circumcised, and you don't have to become uncircumcised, which is not possible. But it's just the idea that you don't have to change. Okay, circumcision is nothing, and uncircumcision is nothing. But keeping the commandment of God is what matters. Let each one remain in the same calling in which he was called. So instead of trying to be preoccupied with trying to make this kind of social changes or changing your life circumstances, he's saying use your time and effort to testify to the grace of God in the place where you are. Wherever it is that you are, be sanctified and glorify God in that place. Okay? So one kind of thing that comes out of this, or that we might think of, is more and more in our modern day life, Christian churches are being more and more focused on what's called the social gospel. Have you heard this term, the social gospel? What is the social gospel?
Like how to cater the gospel to the social standards in a sense.
Okay.
Also.
What is a Christian duty to society?
Truth. To be true.
Truth, okay.
Bring others to Christ.
Bring others to Christ, okay. So the term social gospel is referring to something very specific. And essentially saying what? We take the aspects of the gospel where Christ was speaking about how we should deal with one another, right? How do we serve one another? And that becomes the focus of Christianity, okay? So those people who are very interested in the social gospel, they'll spend so much time, for instance, thinking about how do we feed the poor, fixing injustice, all kinds of things related to society, right? To social issues, right? But when it comes to things like praying and fasting and spiritual things, those things are not emphasized so much. To the point where you have now, even though they call themselves churches, you can't really say that they're churches, even though they call themselves Christian, and all they focus on is the social gospel. So essentially, they become like a charitable organization, and all we care about is helping people and making sure everybody is good, and which is good. It's good to do those things, and that is part of what Christians are supposed to do. But that's not the core of Christianity, right? Why is it that we are doing those things, right? So this is becoming more and more an issue. The idea that the Christians are not really focusing on what is really needed, right? We're focusing on these peripheral issues. What are some other kind of peripheral issues or side issues that you think that we focus on that should not be the main focus in our spiritual life or in the church?
Beef.
Hmm?
It's going to sound bad, but how detailed we are in our fasting, maybe.
Okay, so that's good. So what do you mean?
So sometimes people are super picky on the chips and all that, but they're not necessarily sanctifying the fast by just changing their diet and being very strict on their diet. There's other parts to fasting that they're not acting out.
So is it wrong to look at the ingredients?
No.
No. Is it wrong to be accurate?
No.
No.
You just got to do the whole package.
But you got to do the whole package.
Yeah.
Right? Very good. Actually, this is one of the things that Christ was criticizing the Pharisees for. Right? He said to them, "Woe to you Pharisees, for you tithe mint and rue and all manner of herbs, and pass by justice and the love of God. These you ought to have done without leaving the others undone." right? So if the Pharisees, they were tithing even their spices and their herbs that they got. This is, oh, I'm going to give 10% of my herbs, to God, and 10% of my spices, not just 10% of my income. I'm going to give even 10% of like everything, right? Which, okay, it's good. It looks very pious, okay? But they were ignoring all kinds of other things, right? They were passing by justice and the love of God, right? And he's saying you should have done both, right? You should have done both things together, not just focused on the external aspects of tithing, right? And ignored like the internal aspects of personal sacrifice, right? So that's a good example, like some peripheral issue that we spend a lot of time arguing about, or focusing on, that's not really beneficial.
Or vice versa.
Which is
saying, "Oh, I don't have to change my diet. I can just do other things during the fast. Give up other stuff."
okay. So
works both ways. It's a full package.
Works both ways. You're right. What else? What are some other peripheral or side issues that we get distracted by and we lose sight of the main focus?
Only biblical or ritual, canonical?
Anything.
Service.
Okay, what about it?
Like focusing on the service itself, not like what you do, but not the spirit of it.
Okay, good. So sometimes we focus on the technicalities of things, like in the service, maybe, but we don't think about the spirit of the service. Like I'll give you an example. Let's say I'm a Sunday school servant and I have certain kids in my class, and I am very diligent in my service. So I want to make sure I have like a little notebook thing where I have all the check boxes, and I make sure that I call each kid and I do everything the way I should do it, and I'm very religious with it. I never miss a week, and I call them and I visit them and I do everything. And from the outside, it looks great. But then, let's say there's another person who is not technically on my list, maybe from another class, and I see that they are in need of something. And in my mind, I'm like, well, I don't really need to help them because I already have my responsibility and I'm already doing it right. And so, I'm not gonna do anything. Someone else will deal with it. Okay. So maybe that's a reflection of the idea that I'm more interested in making sure that my chart is perfect rather than I am in actually wanting to serve people, right? Because I'm deciding who to serve based on this kind of arbitrary qualification. Okay. Good. So praying too. Sometimes we say, okay, you know what? I'm going to pray, and I'm going to pray a certain number of minutes, or I'm going to pray a certain number of hours from the Ikbeya, and that's all I care about. Is I prayed my minutes, and I prayed my hours, and I prayed whatever I'm supposed to pray, or I read my pages, or I did whatever, and that's all I care about. But do I actually care about like connecting with God? Do I actually care about learning? Do I actually care about like the essence of things? Or am I only just satisfied with doing the minimum? Okay, and so sometimes we get caught up with so many things, the equivalent of circumcision, okay, and we lose sight of the reason behind why we do it, okay.
These things are like for someone who's still like beginner at them, like that's what he would have to start with. Like the issue is like go beyond them and like getting the spiritual aspects as well.
I mean, I'm not saying that we don't do them. We do them, but we do them with the right attitude, right? We do them understanding why we do them. It's not because doing them in itself is the goal. It's because we try to get to the real goal behind it, which is like the spiritual connection with God. So then he goes on, and this is a bit controversial, actually, in some people when they read this. St. Paul is saying this. He says, "Were you called while a slave? Do not be concerned about it. But if you can be made free, rather use it. For he who is called in the Lord while a slave is the Lord's freedman. Likewise, he who is called while free is Christ's slave." What do you think about that?
Okay, so is it speaking out as like if a slave was made free, but the master of that slave might not be like a believer? So I mean, does that have anything to do with this? You know what I mean?
It's not speaking about the master, the condition of the master. It's saying, as a slave, okay, I become Christian.
Yeah.
Okay, what should be my focus? Should my focus be on attaining my freedom from slavery, or not?
No.
Okay, then what should be the focus?
I mean, growing closer to God.
Okay.
Yeah.
But some people when they read this, they say, you know what? It sounds like St. Paul is not really against slavery.
But that has nothing to do with what St. Paul is saying. The slave doesn't have the option, like whether he's a believer or not, to just get up and leave. It's the master's decision. So whether if the master's a believer, he has a slave, and that's a different story.
But didn't Christ come to make everyone like have justice? And isn't slavery evil? So how is it that we can speak about slavery so casually like this, and we don't like say we don't argue against it?
Because there's not always a way out.
Because we used to be
like-
slaves.
There's not always a way out. Like I don't see how the slave could have a way out unless the master granted him that option. Like regardless whether the slave is a believer or not, that doesn't matter. All that matters is if the master.
It's like saying you're in jail. And you convert to Christianity, and you can just walk out of jail.
Exactly. It doesn't make any sense.
Okay, so his focus here is not trying to show whether slavery is right or wrong. He's speaking about a reality that's the way it was back then. Okay, and while you could have said, okay, well, Christ would have come and tried to make a revolution and say, you know what, we're going to end slavery because slavery is unjust, and we're going to change the way that society treats women because it's unjust, and we're gonna like resolve every injustice, right? But Christ didn't do that. He didn't come to solve every injustice. He actually did not even prevent his own injustice from happening to him, right? So this again is the difference between the social gospel and the real gospel. Okay, the social gospel, all the social gospel is interested in is making these superficial changes in society. That even though some of them are good changes that should be made, like we shouldn't have slavery. Okay, but that's not the goal of the gospel. The goal of the gospel is salvation. So the idea is that even if you live as a slave for your entire life, but in Christ you are Christ's freedman, right? The spiritual freedom that Christ gives is greater than the physical freedom that you could attain in the world. So an important thing to always remember about Christ's mission, about the purpose of salvation and why Christ came, Christ did not come to resolve every problem that we have. He didn't come so that every problem or every injustice that we face is going to disappear, right? You mentioned earlier the prosperity gospel, right? That's the prosperity gospel.
Mm-hmm.
He came to set us spiritually free, and that is what he did. So when he goes to this person who is a slave, he says, if you can attain your freedom, great. But even if you can't attain your freedom, the freedom that you have attained in Christ is far greater than any freedom that you will attain. Right? So he's making it focus on the spiritual. And this is the thing that modern Christianity in the West has lost sight of. Right? That Christianity is about the spiritual. It's not about the physical. It's not about the social justice. It's not about reforming this and reforming that. It's about making a connection with God, right? That's why we focus so much on praying and fasting and these things, right? It's not just about external actions. It's about like an internal change inside of myself. Yes.
So what is St. Paul saying when he says, likewise, he who is called all free is Christ's slave?
What do you think it means?
Is he just saying those who are free but not believers? I don't really know.
He's talking about on the other hands, those who are became Christians while they're free, like they're good as slaves because they're Christ's slaves.
It's like we become like we make Christ as our master, right? As Christians, we make Christ to be our master. So he uses the word slave. What he means is that we submit to him, right? We serve him. We choose to serve him, right? So even those people who are free are still submitting themselves to God. Okay.
Cool.
So, kind of conclusion of this is that in the eyes of Christ, both the slave and the free person are actually equal if they are believers because they have been set free from the authority of the devil. Right? So they are no longer under the yoke of bondage of Satan. You were bought at a price. Do not become slaves of men. Brethren, let each one remain with God in what state in which he was called. Okay? So what does it mean here when he says, do not become slaves of men?
Like don't fall into like the treasures of men.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing good in it. No one likes being a slave. So I don't know. Seek the treasures of heaven.
Right. So in St. Paul's understanding here, he's saying that to be really a slave is not because you are labeled as a slave or because you have to work for another person. To be really a slave is to be a slave of sin. Okay? To be slave to the will of the world as opposed to the will of God. Right? And in Luke 12 it says, "And I say to you, my friends, do not be afraid of those who kill the body, and after that have no more that they can do. But I will show you whom you should fear. Fear him who after he has killed has power to cast into hell. Yes, I say to you, fear him." What is it saying? He's saying, have fear of the Lord, right? Fear Lord and don't fear men. Don't become slaves of men. Don't submit to the system of the world. Do not be afraid of anyone that can harm you physically, right? Our fear, our respect should be to God alone, okay? Now concerning virgins, I have no commandment from the Lord, yet I give judgment as one whom the Lord in his mercy has made trustworthy. Okay, so what does it mean I have no commandment from the Lord, yet I give judgment?
There's no physical commandment, but with the wisdom that he's been given from God, he has the ability to give judgment.
Right, so he's giving a recommendation based on his experience, right, and his guidance, not because God has said the following has to happen. Okay? So it says, I suppose therefore that this is good because of the present distress, that it is good for a man to remain as he is. Are you bound to a wife? Do not seek to be loosed. Are you loosed from a wife? Do not seek a wife. Right? So again, he's saying, don't change the condition and the status that you're in when you become a Christian. If you are married, when you convert to Christianity, you can stay married. There's nothing wrong with staying married. And if you are single, there is nothing wrong with remaining single. Okay, so again, like we said at the beginning, everyone stays like in the state that they were called. But even if you do marry, you have not sinned. And if a virgin marries, she has not sinned. Nevertheless, such will have trouble in the flesh, but I would spare you. Okay? So what is this trouble in the flesh that he's speaking about when it comes to marriage? Because most people in the world marry. Most people expect to be married. Most people plan to be married. Most people anticipate being married from a very young age. Most people assume that marriage is the only option. Okay? So here, when St. Paul is speaking about this kind of in this very frank way, and he's saying, if you marry, you have not sinned, okay? But you will have trouble. Okay, so, and he's saying, I wish to spare you this trouble. Okay, what is this trouble? Marriage.
Well, this goes back to the other chapter when St. Paul said, like, it is not wrong to marry, but you'll have trouble.
But it's on you.
Because he believes that, like, celibacy is just the best.
The best thing ever.
Yeah, that's St. Paul's opinion.
Yeah.
It's just harder to stay focused on God, I guess, in a marriage than it is being celibate.
Okay, so the focus is on what? The trouble that he's talking about is what trouble? It is, he's not speaking about the trouble of like hardship in the world, because even those who are celibate have hardship in the world, right? Even those who go and live as monastics, they experience a lot of hardship, right? So he's not saying like, okay, well, if you're married, you have no hardship, or sorry, you have all the hardship, and if you're not married, then it's like life is easy and simple, okay? The trouble that he's speaking about is specifically the distraction from growing in God is the trouble. Okay, and St. John Chrysostom, he emphasizes this. He says, here he does not speak about her who chooses virginity, or else she would be doing wrong. The evil is not in the matrimonial relationship as much as it is in the hindrance of the seriousness of life. Okay, it is in the hindrance of the seriousness of life, because we become so consumed and distracted by this relationship that I lose my focus, right? And to be honest, I see this a lot. Like after people get married, the people that used to come to church and to dress as deacons and to do this and this and this very early, and they would come and now suddenly, where are you? Where are they? Where have they gone? I don't know. They didn't come.
It was just a culture.
No. Okay. Actually, in the Old Testament, it says what? That any man who takes a wife can have exemption from work for an entire year.
That's amazing.
Doesn't apply anymore.
That's awesome.
So see, that's the thing, is you are now so consumed with another person and trying to please that person and being with that person, that it's like all these other things that used to be the most important thing are now kind of like they go down in the list of importance. Okay, and a big part of the discipline of marriage is to keep those things up at the very top of importance, which is why when two people get married, they both have to have that the same desire. Because if they don't both have that same desire, then they're not going to be able to successfully achieve that, of making sure that God is the number one and that everything else comes after that, right? So this is the trouble he's speaking about, right? He's speaking about the trouble as like an additional obstacle between them and God, because they are getting in their own way, right? They're getting in their own way. But this I say, brethren, the time is short, so that from now on even those who have wives should be as though they had none, those who weep as though they did not weep, those who rejoice as though they did not rejoice, those who buy as though they did not possess, and those who use this world as not misusing it. For the form of this world is passing away. Okay, what does this mean?
Not using their time correctly on earth.
Okay, not using time correctly.
To hold on to the world like loosely, so like
Yeah, loosely. Not to be attached to those things. Like, for instance, when you say, I have a wife, but I live as though I had no wife, what does that mean? Does that mean like I ignore my wife?
Oh, but
You know, like I was thinking about this, like someone who lives as a single person, who knows how to live as a single person for many, many years and decades, okay? And then after they get married, it's like they forget how to live as single again, right? Now they are married, right? It's like you adapt to a new type of life that it's very hard to go back to the old life again, right? Because we become attached to certain things, right? Or a person who had no children, now after having children, they can never go back again to not having children, because it's like a part of them, right? And so here he's saying all these things in the world that are temporary, you will suffer when you hold on to them. You will suffer when you hold on to them, because you will not have them forever, right? There will be a time where these things can be taken away. St. Augustine, he says, let us possess and not be possessed, right? Like the things that I own, I am the master. I am the one owning them. They are not the ones owning me, right? Let us hold and not be held, right? Like I hold something that I own, but that thing doesn't hold on to me. Let us be masters of and not slaves to our possessions, according to the words of the apostle. Do not let those possessions hold your hands, which should hold God. Let your love not become preoccupied by anything, as by it you cross over to God and to stick to Him who created you. Right? So, all the things in the world should not be the source of our comfort, right? Even those people who weep or rejoice about things in the world should realize that these weepings and these rejoicings are temporary. Like if I'm really, really upset about something that happened to me in the world, I should live as though I am not weeping, because these things are temporary. And if I'm really rejoicing and so happy because of something that happened to me in the world, I should also remember that this thing that I'm so excited about is only temporary, right? He's saying, don't live for anything in the world, but live for God only. But I want you to be without care. He who is unmarried cares for the things of the Lord, how he may please the Lord. But he who is married cares about the things of the world, how he may please his wife. There is a difference between a wife and a virgin. The unmarried woman cares about the things of the Lord, that she may be holy both in body and in spirit. But she who is married cares about the things of the world, how she may please her husband. Right? So again, spouses can be either a support or a hindrance to our spiritual lives. And oftentimes, if we don't choose correctly, if we don't choose wisely, it can be a hindrance, right? And even when we choose wisely, our natural weaknesses combined with the weaknesses of another person can oftentimes be that, can be that stumbling block. It can be that distraction that I have that keeps me from growing or advancing the way that I was before. Like if you have, like for instance, a married couple, and you have one spouse that wants to pray and wants to fast and wants to go to church early and wants to do those things, and then another person doesn't want that. They're not used to that. They never were used to doing that. They come like late, like at the gospel. They don't pray very often. They don't fast all the fasts and so on. And you have now these two people that are living together. How is it that they're going to interact with one another? Right? Who's going to decide what's done? And even if, okay, the person who doesn't fast says, okay, you fast and I'm not going to fast, right? It's still going to be like a negative impact on the relationship. It's not going to be as easy as it was when that person was single, right? So he's emphasizing this, that there's a difference between a wife and a virgin. And this I say for your own profit, not that I may put a leash on you, but for what is proper, and that you may serve the Lord without distraction. Okay? So again, he's not trying to restrict people, right? He's not saying, I'm telling you that you cannot do this, because he said, no, this is not a commandment from the Lord, right? This is his own judgment, his own recommendation, right? He's saying, I have seen that when people are married, that they become attached and they are distracted from God, they're distracted from serving God, they're distracted from this, right? Because they are too involved with their own spouses, okay? But I'm not putting a leash on you, meaning I'm not restricting your freedom. I'm not telling you not to marry, but I am saying that I'm warning you, right, of what is going to happen when you do. So when we enter into a marriage relationship, we should be careful in knowing that these are the pitfalls. These are the things that we have to look out for, and these are the things that we have to be very careful about. This is why actually in the church, a lot of couples, based on actually the story of Tobit, the story of Tobit, who married Sarah, Tobit's son, who married Sarah, that they remained in abstinence from one another for a period before they consummated their marriage, right? And even till today, some married couples, after they get married, instead of going directly to their honeymoon, they go to the monastery and they spend 3 nights in the monastery, separated from one another, right? Before they then go on their honeymoon and they consummate the marriage. And this is again to demonstrate this idea that even though I am now married, but the Lord is the number one. Right? The Lord is still the one that I serve. He is still the number one in my life. And both people are saying that by doing this,
That's
right?
where it originated from.
From the story of Tobias and Sarah.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome.
Yeah. But if any man thinks he is behaving improperly toward his virgin, if she is past the flower of youth, and thus it must be, let him do what he wishes. He does not sin. Let them marry. So saying it's not wrong to marry, right? If you are betrothed to a woman and she is getting older and he feels bad not to marry her, okay, because they have been together, then he does not sin to marry her. Nevertheless, he who stands steadfast in his heart, having no necessity, but has power over his own will, and has so determined in his heart that he will keep his virgin, does well. So then he who gives her in marriage does well, but he who does not give her in marriage does better. Right? So again, he's reminding of what he is saying is this higher calling, right? Which is the calling of complete consecration to God, which is what he keeps explaining. A wife is bound by law as long as her husband lives, but if her husband dies, she is at liberty to be married to whom she wishes, only in the Lord. But she is happier if she remains as she is, according to my judgment, and I think I also have the Spirit of God. Okay, so what is he saying here?
He's saying that if wife or husband are to be widowed, they can essentially remarry.
Mm-hmm.
But he advises that through the wisdom that he's been granted, that they should remain widowed instead of remarrying.
Yeah, so he says it would be better not to remarry. Okay, and he says what I think I also have the Spirit of God, meaning like he's saying I'm speaking from the wisdom of God when I say this. Okay, but it's not wrong for them to marry again. Okay,
It's a bit sarcastic,
Hmm?
and I think I also have the Spirit of God. Why say it like that? That's so weird.
I mean he's saying because at the beginning when he said these are not commandments of God, but he's saying I'm speaking these things out of the wisdom that comes from God, not because God told him this is the law, right? This is not the law. Okay, any questions about chapter 7?
I have one question.
Yeah.
So why is it always saying like a wife has liberty to remarry, but they never mention like if a husband loses their wife, can a husband remarry?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Yeah, it mentioned the husband earlier here.
I must mix it.
Yeah.
I feel like it just always says.
Because the men always say, like it's always a given, I guess, for them. But I feel like they always have to specify.
There you go.
But they always have to specify for the women specifically in certain things. Like, I don't know.
Thank you.
I mean, I know it was here. The verse I'm looking for.
I just don't know.
Yeah.
Paul really doesn't like marriage, does he?
No, he's like, I buy with him. But no, you can.
Okay. This is a chapter that I had discussed before with some of you, like in other Bible study, when we were talking about the conscience and what is, how is it that a Christian should behave? What is considered right and wrong, and based on what? Okay. So he says, now concerning things offered to idols, we know that we all have knowledge. Knowledge puffs up, but love edifies. What is he speaking about? So he's speaking about the practice that was done at the time where some Gentile pagans were offering animal sacrifices to their pagan idols. Okay? And then the animals that were offered, they would take their meat, some of the meat, and they would sell it in the marketplace. And it would be known that these animals were sacrificed to idols. And so the Christians, okay, which were comprised of people from all kinds of backgrounds. Some of them were Jewish people who had never worshipped idols and had always understood that idols were evil and they stayed away from them and that idols are not really God. Okay, and then there were other Christians that were recent converts from Gentiles, which were the same very pagans that used to worship those idols. Okay, so you have this group of people of all kinds of different backgrounds. And so the question came is it lawful or not to eat the meat that was sacrificed to these idols that you can buy in the marketplace or not? Okay, that was the question. And the answer that St. Paul gives is not specific to whether eating meat sacrificed to idols is right or wrong. He's giving a way of decision making. He's giving a way of deciding how I should act. Okay, and that's the thing we should get from this chapter. How is it that I should act is not just based on the law, but it's based on how my actions affect others. Okay, when he says we know that we all have knowledge, what he's saying is we all know the law. We all know what is right and wrong based on what God has said. But our actions should not be only determined by what is written, right and wrong, but should also be determined by how my actions affect others. That's why he says, knowledge puffs up, but love edifies. That I show love to my neighbor by acting a certain way so that I do not become a stumbling block for them. Okay? So, and he's going to explain. And if anyone thinks that he knows anything, he knows nothing yet as he ought to know. But if anyone loves God, this one is known by him. Okay, what does it mean when it says, if anyone loves God, this one is known by him?
God knows that he loves him.
Okay, what does it mean to be known by God?
I mean, I know the reverse side of it. Like we can know of God and knowing God are different. So God knows that we exist, and like if we have a relationship with Him, He's gonna know us.
Okay, so the knowing that it's talking about is not just the knowledge of existence, right? It's like a favor. It's like that God is showing us favor, that God is in union with us. Okay, that's the kind of knowing here. And 1 Corinthians 13 it says, "For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know just as I also am known." Right? So he's saying like in heaven when we are going to see God and we're going to know him just as he knows us. Like we're going to see him clearly, okay? Um, so here again he's emphasizing the idea of knowledge. Okay? What does it mean to know? How is it that we should know what to do? Therefore, concerning the eating of things offered to idols, we know that an idol is nothing in the world, and that there is no other God but one. For even if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is one God, the Father of whom are all things, and we for him, and one Lord Jesus Christ, through whom are all things, and through whom we live. Okay, so what is he saying? What is here in verse 4? What is he saying in verse 4?
Like eating the meat of the idols isn't necessarily wrong, because an idol is nothing. It's not a god. There's nothing special about an idol.
Right. So those people who are mature Christians, okay, at the time, they would say, well, these idols are not real. They're just like statues that people have made. So if you get some meat from HEB and you imagine this podium is like some kind of a statue, and somebody begins to offer this meat to the statue, would you have any issue eating the meat after that? Would you be like, no, that meat has been defiled because it was offered to the podium? You know, like you wouldn't like for most people that wouldn't be something offensive, right? Because we understand that this is not really anything, you know, like it's not a real God. Okay, and so that's what Saint Paul is saying. Saint Paul is saying on that level that offering, you know, this meat to these idols doesn't mean anything. Okay, for even if there are these so-called gods, like these idols, they say that they're gods, okay, but they're not really gods because we believe in God the Father, whom are all things, and we for him, and one Lord Jesus Christ. Okay, so the bottom line is this action that the people were considering, whether it was right or wrong, he's saying there's nothing wrong with it. And he could have just ended the chapter, you know. And a lot of times that's like we want the answer. What we should do? That's the answer. Okay, but he doesn't end. Okay, he keeps going. Yeah.
What does he mean by whether in heaven or on earth?
So he's speaking about like how there could be things on earth that people consider to be gods or lords, right? Like there is the one true God, but of the people that believe in other gods, right? There are all kinds of different gods. Okay?
Cool.
However, there is not in everyone that knowledge. What knowledge is he talking about?
Knowing that these idols mean nothing and the meat sacrifice is plenty.
Right. There's not in everyone that knowledge. For some, with consciousness of the idol, until now, eat it as a thing offered to an idol, and their conscience being weak is defiled. So what does that mean?
The thing that really is defiled is a conscience, not food.
So there are some Christians, the younger Christians, the Christians that came from that Gentile background. Like imagine like you were a pagan, you know, idol worshiper yesterday, and then you converted, and today is your first day as a Christian. Okay, and now people are giving you this meat to eat that was offered to the God that you worshipped yesterday. How would you feel about it? You know, it's not very comfortable, right? Like you wouldn't feel good about that. Even though maybe on a mental level, people are telling you it's fine, there's nothing wrong, you know, but you're just not settled about it because you lived that life, like that was you doing that. You don't want any mention of these things. You don't want to go to their temples. You don't want to see it anymore. You want to hear the names of these gods. You don't want to see any, like you avoid that completely because that's the old life. And like we know, it's very easy to revert back to an old life once we've started embarked on a new life. Okay, so for some, right, the idea of eating this meat sacrificed to idols was clearly wrong. They didn't want to have anything to do with it. Okay, and it says their conscience being weak, right? What does that mean that their conscience is weak?
Still new to the faith.
Okay, they're still new to the faith, and the thing that they think is wrong is actually not wrong, but to them it's wrong. To them it feels wrong. They don't want it. They will not be convinced when you tell them that it's right, and they feel that it's wrong. So, because they are weak, when they see the other Christians doing this, their conscience is defiled. They're offended. They're offended by what they see. It's like a scandal to them. Okay? But food does not commend us to God. For neither if we eat are we the better, nor if we do not eat are we the worse. Right? So he's saying the food is not the issue, right? God is not telling us eat or do not eat or this. This is not a matter of, this is not a matter of whether the food is right or wrong. Okay? It is the food is just food. It's neutral. God does not have any opinion about the food itself. But beware lest somehow this liberty of yours become a stumbling block to those who are weak. What does that mean?
Like even though you have the knowledge, this meat, eating this meat means nothing. If people see you doing it and you become a stumbling block to someone who doesn't have that same knowledge, then I mean, you're falling into sin.
So what is a stumbling block?
You cause someone else to sin.
Cause someone else to sin by my own actions. So even if my actions are not wrong. So it's saying I could be doing something that is not wrong. And yet my actions, which are right, are causing someone else to sin. And so I am told not to do what it is that I'm doing, even though it's right. Yes? Okay. This is important. Because again, what am I basing my behavior on? My behavior is not just based on the law. It's not just based on the 10 Commandments. It's not just based on what Christ said was right and wrong. Right? Because he's saying there are things that even though they are right, but if I do them in front of others that see me do it, then I will cause them to sin. Okay, now keep that in mind. Okay, why would I be causing them to sin? Let's say that I'm eating meat sacrificed to idols, okay, and Chris is offended by that. So in what way is he going to sin? Jealousy? What is he going to be jealous of? The fact that I can get to eat the meat? Okay, maybe.
He might judge you.
He'll
judge you.
Okay, so he might judge me for doing something that he believes is wrong. Okay.
He'll see you as a hypocrite, and so that will make his idea of Christianity weaker.
Okay, so he'll see that I'm a hypocrite because I'm supposed to be Christian and doing Christian things, but I'm clearly doing something evil according to his own perspective. Okay. What else?
Might get tempted.
Tempted to do what?
eat the meat.
To eat the meat.
And then that.
Oh. So he's gonna eat the meat? Wait a minute. But I thought we said eating the meat wasn't wrong.
I mean, it could go the other way. It could be like, if I'm a Christian and I know it's not wrong and I eat it in front of somebody, they might think, oh, well, they can worship God and do this even though it's sacrificed to another God and it's okay. So it's kind of like if I do something on Sunday and I'm a religious person in church and I turn around and people see me cursing outside, but they know I'm a Christian, they're like, oh, well, then it's okay for Christians to do this and still worship their God, and it's okay and it's fine.
Yes, and actually, in the Old Testament, even people that believed in God, like Nebuchadnezzar, for instance, he was a pagan, and when he believed in the God of Daniel, it didn't make him stop believing all his other gods. So it's possible that he would say, okay, you know what, I believe in God, but I also believe in Baal, and I, still practice these other pagan things, and that's okay, right? I'm not going to think that. But I want to go back to the point about the eating the meat. Okay, so if we're talking about a stumbling block, that a stumbling block is an action that I do causes another person to sin. And then you said that one of the things he might do to sin is to eat the meat. But eating the meat is not wrong. So how would that be a stumbling block?
He doesn't have that knowledge.
Uh-huh.
So to him, this is meat sacrificed to idols. The knowledge of this is just regular meat, like this means nothing.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't have that. So eating it is like he's eating it in defilement. Like
so if you do something that you believe is wrong,
it is a sin.
And but even though it's not wrong,
It's a sin.
it becomes sin. Does everyone agree with John?
No.
No?
I know we've talked about this before in certain settings, and I didn't agree, and I still don't.
Well, I'm going to read you the verse. I'm going to read you the verse that says that. Okay?
Oh, not right now.
No, I will. It's coming. It's coming. Okay. For if anyone sees you who have knowledge eating in an idol's temple, will not the conscience of him who is weak be emboldened to eat those things offered to idols? Okay, but you are eating things offered to idols. And St. Paul is saying it's not wrong. But this weak person who sees you eating the meat sacrificed to idols, he then eats meat sacrificed to idols, and it is wrong, right? He will be emboldened to eat those things offered to idols. And because of your knowledge, shall the weak brother perish for whom Christ died. So he's talking about that you have two people that are doing the exact same thing. Okay? One person, they're totally good. There's no consequence for them. What they're doing is not wrong. But to this other person who's doing the exact same thing, they will perish.
It's the intention behind what you're doing.
Okay, well, what is the intention?
The intention of the knowledgeable Christian is this meat means that, like, me eating this meat means absolutely nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But to the unknowledgeable or uneducated Christian, this is meat that is offered to idols. This is something that these idols are not real gods. So me eating it is eating it in defilement.
So they believe that they are cursing God when they eat this. They believe that by doing this, they are demonstrating like an act against God, and they're choosing to do it. Let me give you an example. Let's say, let's say I let you borrow some of my money, and it was a long time ago, and I forgot. Okay, and you had that money with you one day, and you had it like on the table in front of you, and I didn't remember that it was my own money. Okay, and then so I decide that I'm going to steal that money from you, not knowing what it is, and I take the money. Okay, did I steal?
No.
Yes.
Did I steal or no?
Technically, it's your money.
Technically, it's my own money.
But your intention was.
But my intention was to steal
So
it.
you stole it.
So would God judge me as a thief?
Yes.
Yes, because I intended to steal. The fact that it actually technically didn't end up being a thief, like a robbery or whatever, like taking someone else's money, is really not the point. The point is my intention was to commit a sin, right? The fact that it in the end ended up not being a sin didn't change the fact that my intention was evil. Okay, so. But when you thus sin against the brethren and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. This is what he's saying. He's saying when you do something that is good, that in itself is good, but you do it in a way that causes someone else to stumble, okay, then you sin against Christ. Because you are causing this person to sin, because even though the action they're doing is technically not wrong, it is still a sin because they do it without that understanding that it is good. Okay? In Romans 14:23, it says this. But he who doubts, it's speaking about the similar idea of eating the meat sacrificed to idols. It says, but he who doubts is condemned if he eats, because he does not eat from faith, for whatever is not from faith is sin. He who doubts is condemned if he eats. Meaning, if you are concerned that something is going to be a sin, and you say, you know what, I'm still going to do it, and it ended up not being a sin, but God will judge my intention, right? Because when it comes to the opposite way, that's the way that God judges too. Let's say that I had every intention of doing good, right? Let's say I have an intention of doing something good, but inadvertently, as a mistake, without even realizing it, I ended up committing a sin. Well, what do we say? Well, God judges our intention, right? So when it comes to the positive things, when it comes to saying, you know what, I didn't intend to hurt another person, I just didn't know, right? I didn't intend to, to take something that wasn't mine. I thought it was mine. I thought that was mine. I wouldn't have taken it if I didn't think it was mine. So even though technically, yes, I stole, but I didn't mean to steal. I thought it was my own, right? I accidentally took somebody's shoes that I thought were my shoes. So I stole somebody's shoes. Is God going to judge me as a thief? No, I didn't mean to steal. So in that scenario, when we talk about the positive, we say, well, no, God judges the heart, right? So in the negative sense, God also judges the heart. When I intend to do wrong, but it actually turned out not to be wrong, God still judges the heart. We can't say God judges the heart when it is convenient, and then we say God doesn't judge the heart when it's not. Either God judges the heart or he doesn't. Right? And that's what it's saying. He who doubts is condemned if he eats. If I think that this is a sin, and I begin to do it, then it is a sin. Okay? So it's important for whatever is not from faith is sin. So this weak person who doesn't understand, right, what eating the idols means, or the meat sacrificed to idols mean, is committing sin, and I'm the one promoting it by doing even what I know not to be wrong, but I'm doing it in the presence of that person, not taking into a consideration that that person has a weak conscience. Okay. What are some other things? Of course, we're not in our modern day, we're not talking about meat sacrificed to idols. What are some things that would be like practical examples of where this would apply today? Okay, explain.
It's illegal.
It's legal.
I'm a servant in Sunday school.
Mm-hmm.
I am above the age of 21. I can go legally have a drink. But if one of my Sunday school kids sees me drinking, he's gonna see that as something wrong. He's gonna see that as like a way of defilement. Like we always teach that drinking is wrong. So if he sees me drinking, even though it is legally right, he might fall into sin. He might judge me, or even if they might grow up and want to drink. They see me drinking, it's okay. My Sunday school servant was drinking, it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's one example.
Okay, that's a good example.